Daniel Perez has been involved in Bigfooting since his introduction to the subject matter around 1973 by the way of a movie called The Legend of Boggy Creek. He was born and raised in Southern California. He is the author of Bigfoot at Bluff Creek, which is actually considered the Bible when it comes to the Patterson-Gimlin film. And in 1988, he authored Big Footnotes, which is a 188-page bibliography on the subject matter. He's also the editor and publisher of the Bigfoot Times newsletter, which has been publishing its bulletin since January 1998. He is 100% convinced that Bigfoot is a living species in North America that is largely unknown to the scientific world, and he has lectured at numerous conferences and made a few appearances on television. His website is www.bigfoottimes.net. Daniel, thanks for sitting down with us.
You're welcome.
So I just wanted to kind of get to know a little bit more about your belief in Bigfoot. Obviously, it started at a young age back in 1973. You were inspired by this movie. Since then, what has kind of your experience been, with Bigfoot and Bigfoot hunting, and what kind of encounters have you had?
Well, let me tell you one story from about 1979 or 1980. I always keep mixing up those dates, probably 1979. So activity was happening in Hemet, California, and you could think of Hemet, California in between San Diego and Los Angeles. So we developed a rapport with the people that it was happening to, but back in the late 70s, early 80s, everything was a landline phone. There was no mobile phones. So we thought we would go see these people and find out what the latest was in terms of Bigfoot activity in their area. So we knock on the door, and nobody was home. And it had rained quite a bit in that area. And in that area, there were no paved roads. It was all dirt roads. And some of the dirt roads were rutted in the sense that if you were to drive a vehicle, it would be easy to get stuck. And so the guy that was with me, who actually drove, his name was Doug Trapp. And so I said, now what? And I said, well, why don't we just look around in this area, because this is where these sightings and footprints were happening. And so we just stumbled around, and I told Doug, I said, Doug, you probably should stop your car and we should get out on foot and just walk, because if anything that's bad's going to happen, we're going to get your car stuck and we're not going to be able to get it out. So he agreed upon that, and so we started walking around and walking into like some treed areas where a little creek was. And I'm thinking about maybe 10, 15 feet away, we're both looking at the ground, and I think we saw it at the same time. There were tracks. And so I'm still a teenager at the time, and this was my first exposure, and it had rained, so those tracks had been kind of washed on, but they were still nonetheless big tracks that, to my memory, were about 17 inches long with a big wide heel that seemed to be about 3 or 4 inches wide at the heel. And so we started looking around, and we could kind of make sense of where this thing had walked. And Doug had some plaster in his car, and so we tried to make a plaster cast. We did take photos before the plaster castings, but the plaster was, I think, already had moisture in it, so it didn't do a very good job at setting up, and it just crumbled away. So we didn't get a casting, so that was, I guess, our fault. Mm-hmm. I was never expecting to see anything. But that kind of, at that point in my life, it kind of reinforced the idea that there might be something out there, because we thought about it on the way home. We had no idea that we were going to park the car there. We just decided to do it. It wasn't planned. So it's not like someone would have planned those prints and say, like, they're going to stop the car here, they're going to look here.
Right.
We didn't, it was just an afterthought.
Right.
So in terms of someone saying, oh, someone planted those tracks and you just conveniently walked up, and I said, there's no possible way, because we didn't even know we were going to be there.
Right.
So that was my first exposure to what we would call physical evidence in the ground, tracks. And so that kind of, again, reinforced my idea. And so 1980 comes along in the summer, and it was going into my senior year in high school. And the now defunct Texas Bigfoot Research Society was going up to Northern California to the Patterson-Gimlin film site, which they never found, by the way. And I wanted to go with them, and they allowed me to go with them. And as we made this tour up through California, my first time up in that part of the country, we camped in an area called Happy Camp. And this was a campsite that didn't seem to have a lot of people in it. In fact, the way that I remember it, it was basically us and maybe a few other campers. I don't remember. But it was pretty warm. I was sleeping in a hammock outside. And the way I remember it, I had the zipper on my sleeping bag open because it was so warm. And so that night, one of the guys in our crew, because it wasn't just the family, there was other people that were from Texas with us. They came and kind of woke me up. They said, wake up, somebody's throwing rocks. So we're in a heavily wooded area in a campground. And it was hard for me to wake up because I was in a pretty sound sleep. But I did wake up, and he said, somebody's throwing rocks. And so I'm trying to process this information, and then I hear a thud on the dirt, and I said, it really woke me up because I could hear it, that something was being thrown. Got out of my sleeping bag, and the impression I got was that somebody was throwing rocks from a good distance, and the impression I got, having played baseball, is that those rocks were coming in underhanded. Mm-hmm. Like this, being lobbed like this, because you could see it as the rock was landing within the 5 feet. And it was interesting because it was dark out, and these rocks were landing very close to us but not hitting us. And so I started laughing because I thought it was just ridiculous that someone would be throwing rocks, and I thought maybe it was a prank.
Yeah.
And so I had seen on In Search Of, the long defunct television series with Leonard Nimoy narrating, that one of the people that was interviewed on the show said something like ook, ook, because that was a native language of Bigfoot or whatever. And I just remembered that. I never really gave it any thought, but I remember yelling out in the woods from the campground, ook, ook. And then what came back was this long, drawn-out grr. You could just think of it with a G, a lowercase g with a bunch of R's, just grr. And then it went quiet, and that was it. Everything stopped. No more rocks. We never saw anything. We never saw who was throwing the rocks. The next day, we went up to look, but as that stopped, I was still thinking that someone was playing a prank on us, so I surveyed our party. Yeah. Were we all accounted for? And everyone, some of the people were sleeping in the Chevy Suburban wagon with the seat folded down, and they had sleeping, and I said, yeah, there they are, they're all there. Yeah. And so, to this day, in that area, I don't know what was throwing the rocks that were the size of about a baseball, but someone was throwing rocks, and I'm open to the possibility that it may have been a Bigfoot because I don't know any other animal in the woods that could throw rocks. Right. And it didn't scare me. It was kind of surreal that something like this could be happening. And so that kind of, again, I wouldn't say it was Bigfoot, but my other option was like, what else could it have been? If it was a person joking, we would have found that person, I think, because we went up to the way I remember it. This is a long time ago, 42 years ago. We went up with flashlights on that hill, kind of looking around, nothing. Nothing. So I said, I don't know. It just remains a mystery to me. But that, again, kind of sucked me into the research and investigation even more. So then I became a lifelong Bigfooter.
Interesting. So you had mentioned, a little bit about people playing pranks or people setting you up. In the Bigfoot community, I know that, because you believe so strongly in Bigfoot, there's a lot of naysayers, haters, if you will. People that, what would you say to the people that say, "Oh, you're crazy, Bigfoot doesn't exist"? What would you say to them?
Well, anymore, nothing, because I don't want to waste time on that aspect.
Good answer.
I'm 100% convinced that they're out there, and I mean, if you look at the wolverine as a species here in North America, most people don't even know what a wolverine is, much less having seen one in the wild. And they're such a rare animal in North America that you almost never see them. And that the one that was seen last year, I want to say in the state of Idaho, that one had crossed the road and they got a picture of it, and it's such a big deal to see one that it made the newspaper.
Yeah.
And so that just tells you, the rarer the animal in terms of population, the less likely people are going to see them. And if you have Bigfoot out there, that is a very small population. It's not like people are going to see them all the time.
Right.
And so because of that, there's a certain segment of the population that thinks that there's nothing out there. This is all imagination, myth, hoax, whatever.
Going off that, because there's such a small population, would you say that potentially hunting or trying to find Bigfoot could be harmful to the species instead of letting it just kind of remain in its habitat?
No, because if you take one example out of the population, then you've gone from hundreds of years of collecting evidence to one data point that would go beyond evidence, that would be proof. If someone were to get a body, then all the evidence accumulated saying like, oh, that evidence really was what we thought it was, and this specimen, this holotype, is the proof that all of these previous reports were for real. So I don't think taking one out would be a bad thing or it would affect the population, but then again, to be honest with you, I don't know. But that's not going to stop a poacher from going to kill a deer or a bear or any other animal out there.
Right.
So it's not like even if there were laws on the books that said that you can't kill a Bigfoot, that's not going to stop a poacher.
Right.
He's going to go out and do what he wants to do.
Right.
So that argument, in a sense, to me is like non-existent.
Okay, cool. And then where does Bigfoot come from, essentially? I've heard there's a lot of different ideas. I'm not as educated in Bigfoot. What is Bigfoot? I've heard people that say it's an ape. I've heard people that say it's a mammal, people that say it's even a branch of human, of a Neanderthal.
Well,
what is Bigfoot?
What is Bigfoot in the sense that there's a lot of people, because we don't have a specimen to study or to take genetic samples or any of that, the question is wide open. And so I would back up and I would say our best guess for the moment is it's a primate like us, because we are primates. And I would just leave it at that, because if you were to go further down the road or farther down the road, it's just a guessing game. If you were to say it's an ape, part of the ape group, part of the human species, that's your guessing. And I would say just until that time comes, the best answer is to say, I don't know, or more than likely it's just a primate that's in the group that we're in. And that should be enough, Yeah. I mean, if I were to take a picture of you 500 feet away and someone would say, okay, zero in on our shoes. Are those Nikes or New Balance or what?
Yeah.
And it's just like, I would say, I don't know, but it does look like he's wearing shoes.
Yeah. Okay. That's a fair answer. Now, I have also heard that some believe that Bigfoot kind of has very high intelligence, and even to an extent, I've heard some believe it has supernatural powers. Do you believe that at all?
I believe that in terms of intelligence, the natural intelligence, because if you're born and raised in the woods, that everything it does in the woods is natural to it, but because we don't live in the woods on a daily basis, that some of the things that it does are foreign to us, and it's just like, to them it's perfectly natural, and to us it's just like, oh, that's, if we were to observe that behavior, we'd say like, oh, that's probably a good way of going about life in the woods.
Yeah.
But in terms of supernatural or those types of paranormal, I just don't understand how people latch onto it. Perhaps they're coming up with these ideas to explain the data. I think it's a cop-out.
Yeah. And so Bigfoot, you believe, is geographically North America, correct?
Yeah, in fact, anywhere where you find deer population, and pretty much deer are scattered throughout North America, Canada and the United States, from Florida to Maine,
Yeah.
California, down to up to British Columbia, up to Alaska, you've got deer. And so the Bigfoot population would probably overlap because that is a food supply for them.
Yeah.
And with the BFRO database, the website, up and running and has been since about 1995, and all these reports that are mentioned in there, as the late John Green noted, once you start to look at all this data, it becomes apparent that Bigfoot is a massive predator of deers. And you start to think about it in terms of the caloric needs of an animal of that size, especially in the wintertime. Yes, you're going to need a massive amount of calories to stay alive.
So, all over North America is where Bigfoot resides. Whether it's Florida, Texas. But what is, would you say, kind of like the habitat of Bigfoot? Where are they drawn to? Because if you look at certain animals, they're drawn to a specific setting. Deer, they live often in very wooded areas. What is kind of the Bigfoot ideal habitat, if you will?
Here's the thing. It's just like, I don't know if there's an ideal habitat for them because they're seen all over. I mean, they've been seen bumped up right next to small towns, and it's just like the only reason I could figure that you're having, say, in the state of Michigan, these small town encounters on the outskirts of town that are still wooded is that they're coming in one of two things, perhaps curiosity and one, food, because there are reports where these things have been seen in trash dumps looking for food. And so in terms of its ideal location, I don't even know if there is one, because it seems like the Bigfoot mystery would have been solved a long time ago if they lived just in one spot or one geographic pristine location for them. I just get the impression based on the data that they're continually moving around, and I think it has a lot to do with food supply. That they said, okay, we're done here, let's move on to the next area where the deer population is big, and if that deer population happens to be right next to a small town, that's where they want to be because that's where the food is, or where there's nuts and berries on the trees. I wouldn't say it's a crapshoot, but the food supply and water is going to dictate where they are going to be.
Now, are Bigfoot, are they carnivorous? Are they omnivores?
Probably just like a bear. Probably willing to eat anything that it could gobble up. There's a report from Georgia, and this goes back many years ago, where the Bigfoot was seen that was going back to a residence. The people that live there are since passed on, but where this thing had opened some dog food and was eating the dog food. And in fact, the owner said that the dog food seemed to vanish, and the impression was that the Bigfoot was eating it.
And then my last question for you would be this. You discussed how you had multiple times early on that you were kind kind of drawn in to discover Bigfoot. What would you say was the one moment that really had you sold on it, if you will? The one moment where you were like, I'm all in, I 100% believe.
I don't think I could identify one moment, but I could identify with the PG film, which I was fascinated by, the Patterson-Gimlin film. Not just watching it many times, but after Renee DeHinden died in 2001, there was a lot more study on the film by Bill Munns and some other people and some other studies that actually freelancers that have posted stuff up on YouTube that are making these points about the subject in the film, and it just, all the information I'm seeing, it made me completely sold on the idea that the PG film is 100% real, and if the PG film is real, then Bigfoot is out there by process of deduction. So it wasn't just one thing, because, I mean, if I were out in the woods and saw a very good trackway, I would be sold on it, but that's never happened.
Yeah.
The trackway I've seen were degraded by rain and possibly a couple of days, so they weren't the best tracks, but they were tracks. But I think if I saw tracks, really good tracks, I would have been 100% sold, or a close-up sighting 100% sold. But I've never seen one, so I don't know. I don't know in the sense that, well, I'm confident they're out there, but it's just like, I would like to see one. I haven't, but, you know, seeing one would be, again, it would reinforce your idea that you already have.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you sitting down with us, and I thank you for your time. And
Very good.
It's great to learn a little bit more from you.
Okay.
All right. Have a great rest of your day. We are all set.
Great. Yep.
Now I can have
Awesome.
an iced tea.
There
Well,
you
thank
go.
you. I told you I would do
Yeah,
this.
that was awesome. That was really good. I appreciate that.
And it looks like you guys got some good equipment too.